So I wouldn't want to send you out into the world without talking about some of the broader context beyond your course when you're writing learning objectives in your department, your institution, and your discipline. So I talked to some faculty about some of the considerations that they take into account in terms of these broader institutional factors.
So I found once I explicate my goals and publish them that colleagues look at them and say, oh, but you're missing like the most important piece of the end of the course. It's usually where it happens.
And also learning objectives are tied to your theory of learning. And so people may have different ideas about what it means to learn something, and that will come through in their learning objectives. So you might see some friction there sometimes when you're talking with colleagues about what you want students to know in your course and be able to do.
Another thing to keep in mind if you're in engineering is that all engineering departments have to be accredited by the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, or ABET. So I talked with faculty in engineering about the ABET certification process.
So I'm Jean Hertzberg, and I'm a faculty member in mechanical engineering. I have guided my department through 2 accreditation processes, 2 rounds of ABET. And so I'm familiar with how that works with our course learning objectives. Accreditation is kind of like a peer review process that whole universities go through. If you are not an accredited institution, employers will not be interested in your students. And so this is true across the board. Every real engineering school is accredited. So ABET specifies what our students have to be able to do when they graduate. An example of this is the one that we all think about in what we want our students to do when they graduate, which is to have an ability to apply a knowledge of mathematics, science, and engineering, right? We all want that. ABET also specifies additional skills such as an ability to function on multidisciplinary teams and an ability to communicate written and orally and so on. And so there's this whole list of ABET outcomes that we have to make sure our students are prepared to perform. So ABET has all of these criteria, and we take those criteria and we kind of own them by recasting them and formatting them in certain ways, and then we call them our mechanical engineering program outcomes in our department. And then we use these outcomes to shape what our course learning objectives are going to be. So once we have these learning objectives for each course, then part of our accreditation process for ABET is to demonstrate that our students can have satisfied all of the learning outcomes in each of the courses, and thereby have satisfied our mechanical engineering program outcomes, and thereby have satisfied all the ABET criteria.
One thing that's really helpful is to show your goals to your colleagues, either one-on-one or as a departmental meeting.
It's just so critical to have those departmental conversations about learning objectives because, we often have multiple faculty teaching the same class, and you want the students to have the same experience, to as they come out and they flow into other classes, you want those other classes to have an expectation of what knowledge they bring into those upper level classes.
And it can be a challenging process to get faculty who teach the same or different classes to agree on those objectives. They don't always necessarily agree, but when they get their ideas out on the table, at least there's the opportunity for people to say, oh, I didn't realize that person valued this particular subject area so much. And maybe we should think about whether that's a critical component of that course so that the next level up, the students understand something. So I guess it gives people an opportunity to at least talk about things they might not normally discuss with each other. They might be discussing their research but not their teaching, and so it's a forum for potentially agreeing on things.
In our department, we had some brown bag lunches, and faculty talked about a specific course. And when we started talking about objectives early on, there was an initial tendency to think about topical level objectives. Mm-hmm. But very quickly the conversation went to these sort of broader scale goals. Mm-hmm. And I think in the end it was very productive because once we had come to some departmental consensus on these higher level goals, then when it came down to the topical level objectives, there was much less discussion or debate because we'd already sort of gotten the big ideas of the course.
Yeah, and it's also useful when you're talking about these learning objectives that that you can share with another faculty member a learning objective, but teach it in two different contexts. So if your learning objective is about light, for instance, somebody could teach that from an astronomy perspective, but then somebody else could teach it from, bulbs and batteries and wires. So just by coming to consensus on the learning objectives doesn't mean that you're tying yourself to a particular content perspective.
So there are several cases in which it's really important to talk to your colleagues. One is when your course is core to the major. Faculty are often very invested in what specific skills and outcomes their majors get from courses. So that's something that really the department should be considering as a whole. Another is if your course is a prerequisite to other courses or part of a sequence. Because in that case, you want to make sure that what you're teaching in your course is what the instructor of the following course expects students to get out of it. Of course, as we heard from Jean Hertzberg, if your course has goals that are related to certification, that's also important to keep in mind. And sometimes you just want your faculty colleagues' expertise and guidance, and that's really great to get. But now, what about cutting content? We talked before that oftentimes when you're writing your learning objectives, you'll realize that your course is a little overloaded and you should streamline it by cutting some content. It can be really smart to do this. And to be honest, departmental curricula are not necessarily so coherent that cutting something from one course is going to deeply affect another course. But cutting content can be politically tricky. One of the things is that for some faculty, anytime you talk about cutting content, they see this that you're reducing the rigor of that course, and that's a real hot button issue. Or they might just have some favorite topics that they want to make sure are in that course. One thing you might do is to focus on what you're going to be able to accomplish in your course by eliminating that extra content. Instead of focusing on what you're leaving out, focus on what you're going to be able to do instead. Maybe you'll be able to have students analyze some scientific papers. One of the things is, if you're a new faculty, sometimes it's important to tread lightly. You might need to be careful about coming across too strong, either in terms of your objectives for your course or in terms of the techniques that you're using in your course that you would learn in this online module. So here are some faculty to talk about some concerns with being a new faculty member.
It may just be that if you start having conversations with your colleagues when you're a first or second year teacher about teaching, people will wonder why you're not having conversations about your research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I actually experienced that a little bit.
I think you can also get really wedded to your ideas, especially as a junior faculty. You've just come out of graduate school and you have some really strong opinions about how things work. And so sometimes if you come across as knowing everything to the faculty who have maybe taught the course before, it can seem a little bit, they can be offended. So you have to be careful. You have to listen to people who have taught the course before. You have to gain their experience and wisdom, and then also think about what you've been learning about learning goals and objectives and develop those in the way that you think are most powerful.
A new faculty member could go and solicit ideas from more established faculty members saying, I'm teaching this course for the first time and you have lots of experience. I'd love to hear how you talk about these topics or which topics you think are most critical. Mm-hmm. And then you could go off and write your objectives and go back to that faculty member and say, I tried to really make it clear what kinds of things you thought were important and how did I do? And maybe that would be a way of bringing in more established faculty members to the process because they might not be familiar with it, but you'd be asking them for advice on what was important.
So as a new faculty member, you do want to use your learning goals to guide your content, but you don't want to lose sight of this broader context. And consulting with your senior colleagues does help you, but it also keeps them part of the process.